Hey everybody, this is Brendan with Business for Chummies. Today we're going to be looking at how to use some of the features in Excel to separate names in a spreadsheet. So in our example here, we have some names in column A that are all full names. We have a first name, a middle initial, and then a last name. So Excel has some pretty basic features that allow us to very quickly separate these names into their respective columns. So we have a column B for first name, middle initial, and then a last name. And we're not going to need to do anything special here in order to separate these as long as all of the names have the same format. So in a minute, we're going to talk through some of the additional, more enhanced, complex features that we're going to need to utilize when the names are in a different format. But one of the easiest ways to get these names separated out is actually the flash fill option. This is an option that not many people utilize, but it is a great tool that really is one of the more advanced features of Excel, and it's intelligent learning. So what the flash fill will do is once I provide some specific examples of what I'm expecting the application to understand, it'll flash fill based on the patterns that I've previously identified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually type in what I expect the results to look like. So I say I want the first name to be in column B, the middle initial and period to be in column C, and the last name to be in column D. And I'll just go ahead and repeat that for the second row here. And once I'm on the third row, I'm just going to navigate up to the flash fill button, and I'm going to hit that button. And it's going to look at my previous pattern, look at the data over here on the left, and it's going to make an assumption based on an intelligent choice of what I'm expecting it to do. I can then come over to the middle initial column and hit flash fill again. And then on the last name, I can either hit Control E if I'm on a Windows or Command E on an Apple, or I can come back up to the flash fill again. This is really nice because it's going to populate all the way down to the bottom to the last row. I don't need to do any kind of dragging and dropping or formulas for this approach. And this approach works really well. It'll work probably 90–95% of the time when all of your data is the exact same format or pattern. All right, the other approach we can use is the text to columns approach. So this gives us a little bit more control around how we want the data to be separated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight only the rows that I want to convert into their own individual columns. So I don't want to select the header because then the text to columns function is going to treat the header as one of the values. So I'm just going to select the rows down below the header. I'll click the text to columns button. And here we have two options, either the fixed width or the delimited option. Fixed width is if all of your values in your column are exactly the same width, but we're going to use the delimited option since our names have different lengths. I'll click the next button, and then here we can indicate how we want the text delimited. By default, Excel has the tab option only selected, but our names are separated using a space. So I'm going to click the space checkbox here, and you'll notice that Excel recognizes the spaces between the first, middle, and last names, and it's separated those three strings into their own individual columns. I'll go ahead and click next here. By default, what Excel is going to do is it's going to replace your values with your separated text strings. So it's actually going to put the first name in column A here, and then middle initial in B, and then last name in column C. You can see that by the destination selection here. It's saying, once I separate these names into three columns, I'm going to start with the A2 cell. We don't want to do that. We want to keep our original values here over in the A column. So I'm going to change this destination to B2. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep our original values in A, and then it's going to separate the text into B, C, and D. So I'll click Finish, and we'll see what happens. There we go. So two really nice, very simple ways to separate these names when all of the data has the same format and pattern. All right, next we're going to take a look at how to handle some of the names when they have different formats or patterns. So we have the same set of names here, but they don't all appear in the same pattern. We have the first two, which are similar. The middle initial is here present. The third row here actually has a middle name that's spelled out. Our fourth row has a middle initial that doesn't have a period, and our fifth row doesn't have a middle name or a middle initial at all. So to accomplish this, we're actually going to have to utilize formulas for each piece of the name that we want to separate. So this part is a little bit more complex. It does require some knowledge around how to use nested formulas and some of the more advanced functions available in Excel. I'll try to talk through them as simply and try to give you as much information about the functions as possible, but I would recommend trying to review and learn some of the functions we're using today beforehand before trying to implement these. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at extracting the first name out of our string here. And the way that we're going to accomplish that is we are going to, from the left side of the string, we're going to extract everything between the first character and the first space. So the way that we do that is with the left function. I'm just going to drop my formula window down here so we have enough space to see what we're doing. So using the left function, what this will do, it'll return the specific number of characters from the start of a text string. And so what it's going to ask me is which string do I want to return, and then how many characters do I want to return. So our text string is going to be here in A2. And then the tough part here is how many characters do I need to return? Now, because all of our first names are different lengths, I can't just choose a number of characters. If I choose 7, then I'm going to get a different value for Peter, right? It'll actually bring in the first 7 characters and bring in a part of the last name. So I need to be able to calculate how many characters there are in each of these first names systematically in the formula without having to type it in. And the way that I'll do that is I will search for the number of characters that exist prior to the first space. And I'll do that by using the search function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the first instance of that space, and I'm going to return the character number prior to that space. So essentially what I'm trying to do here is search for the position of this first space, which would be 7, right? It's the 7th character in the string. We have Stephen, which is 6, and then the space, which is number 7. And then I'm going to subtract 1 from that to say I want to return only the first 6 characters in my left function. So using the search function, I'll say let's search for a space. I want to search for that space in our A2 text. And then I want to start with the very first character of that string. And so what that's going to do, if I look at our formula here and I evaluate it, it's searching for a space, it's searching this string for that space, and it's finding that string in the 7th as the 7th character. If I were to simply close this now, what it would do is it would return the space itself, so return Stephen space. So I want to subtract 1 from that to return only the first 6 characters. And then I'll close my left function. All right, so that gets us our first name. Let's go ahead and pull this down and make sure it applies to everything. All right, looking good there. All right, for the middle initial or middle name, we're going to have to take it up a notch and do something a little bit more complex. That's because not only are we trying to extract a string from the middle of our text, but that string is not always the same length. So for the example, in our first 2 rows here, the middle initial is a G and a dot. Our third example here is a full written out middle name. And on our bottom example here is it's a single character middle initial. So to accomplish this, we're actually going to use the mid function in combination with our search function. So just going to outline kind of what the mid function will allow us to do. So the mid function is going to return a string from the middle of a text if I can define what the starting position is and then how many characters after that starting position it should return. So in our example for this first row here, essentially what we want to return is we want to return the G and the dot. So the G is our 8th character in the string, right? We have 6 for Stephen. The 7th is the space. The 8th is the G. And then we want to return only the 2 characters starting from that position, right? The G and the dot. So if I were to write this out, I could say mid, I want to search for A2. I want to start in the 8th position, and I want to return 2 characters. That's the formula we're trying to get to. But that's not going to work for all of these, right? Because not all of these have the exact same length of the first name. They don't have the same length of the middle initial or middle name, and so that's not going to work. So we need to be able to systematically know these different values. We need to know the text that we're searching for. We need to know the starting position of the middle name or middle initial for each of the different names. And then we need to know the number of characters to return. And then we need to close our mid. So that's kind of our guide there as we go through in the formula. So I'm going to open up my mid function. The text is going to be A2. And now the starting position we want to be able to calculate. So what we're going to do is we're going to search for the first space, and then we're going to return the number position after that first space. So in our example for Stephen here, we would search for the first space, which would be the character number 7. We would add 1 to that to get our number 8 position, which would give us the G. For Clinton here, that would be an additional number 9 because there's 7 letters in his first name, and then so on and so forth. So we'll see how that works. So back up to our mid function here, the starting number, we're going to search for the first time that we see a space within the text, and we want to start that search from the far left. Let's just evaluate this. What we're doing is we're searching for a space in this string, Stephen G. Rogers, and Excel recognizes that the space occurs in the 7th position. But we don't want to return the 7th position. We want to return the 8th position. So I'm going to add 1 here. So that gets us our starting position here. The next part we need is the number of characters to return. So for our first row, we want to return only the 2 characters, but for the third row down here, we want to return these 5 characters. So the way that we do that is actually a little math. So we're going to search for the number of characters that are between our starting position and the beginning of the last name. So the way we do that is we find our second space, we get the position of the first character of the last name, and then we subtract that from the position of the first character of the middle name. So just to reiterate, we're going to take the position of the first character of the last name, and we're going to minus that from the position of the first character of middle name. All right. So I'm going to use the search function again, and I'm going to just put these in parens so I can see my math a little bit easier. So what I want to do is now I'm trying to find the position of the R here. So I'm going to search for the space in my A2 string, but because I don't want to start from the far left, if I do that, it's going to find this first space and it's going to return my G position again, which is what we did previously. So what I want to do is I want to be able to start my search after that first space. So in order to do that, I'm just going to reuse this position up here, which you recall is our 7th position. And if I highlight this, we can see that it's actually the 8th position. So I'm just going to paste this in here. And so what we're doing now is we're saying find the space, find the first space in the string, but start from the middle name and search afterwards. So that gives us our first part here. This will give us the position of the first character of the last name. I'm going to go ahead and close that first part. And then what we want to do is we want to subtract that from the position of the first character of the middle name. So again, I'm going to search. I'm going to find the first time that a space occurs in our string from the far left, and then I want to add 1. All right, so if I evaluate this, we should get a total number of 8, and then if I evaluate this, we should get 10. So we're doing 10 minus 8 equals 2, and that's going to get us our 2 characters here. So I'm just going to close our mid function. I'm going to delete our help text, cross our fingers, and hit go. All right. So for our first row here, everything looking good. Second row looking good. Oh, very nice. So not only did it work for our 2 same patterns, but it recognizes the middle name here. So you can see that what it's doing is it's going out and it's getting the starting position of the middle name and the starting position of the last name, and it's returning the number of characters in between. Let's check out Tony down here. Oops. And then let's see what happens with Peter. Oh no. So the problem is Peter doesn't have a middle name or middle initial. And because we're looking for that second space, it's not finding it. So what we're going to do is just add a really simple error check. We're going to add if error. And so if there's no error, we want to return this value. If there is an error, we actually just want to return a blank cell. And I'll do that by putting 2 double quotes, and then I'll close my parens and hit enter. And so that gives us a nice little error check, allows us to account for some of those odds and ends and those names that don't have a middle initial. All right, for the last name here, we're going to do something a little bit more different. There's very few ways to extract the end portion of a string in Excel. So there's kind of a little bit of a hack that you have to do in order to get to this last name portion. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be blowing out this name into a very long string full of a bunch of spaces. We're then going to be using the trim function to trim off only the last portion of our string and remove all of those leading spaces. So this function actually works a little bit inside out. So we'll just go through some of the initial functions here that actually start in the middle of our formula. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this string and we are going to substitute every space in the string with 100 spaces. So I'm going to do that with the substitute formula, and you'll see why we're doing this in a moment. we're going to substitute uh, the string A2. We want to find all of the spaces in that string. And then I could say here, what I want to replace with that space is 100 spaces, and I could just hold the space bar down and do it that way and be done with it. And you see what that's going to do is it's going to, every place there was a space, it's going to replace it with those with this long string here. But rather than having to hold it down, what we're going to use is the repeat function. So the repeat function is a really nifty function. Anytime you need to repeat something in your formula, I'm going to say I want to repeat a space 100 times. So what it did is I substituted every space with 100 spaces using the repeat formula. All right, next we're going to use the write function, because what we want to do is we want to return everything from our string on the right side. So using the write function, we can say get everything starting from the far right inwards and leave everything else out. And the reason we added those spaces is in case the Rogers name was very long, or the last name was very long, we're able to kind of, we have that that buffer of those spaces when we trim that value. So let's go ahead and see what the write function does. Um, First, I need to indicate which string I'm returning. I'm grabbing the right portion of. I don't want to select A2 because that's going to not pull from our newly extrapolated string. I actually want to use this as the string that we're pulling the right portion from. And then the only other parameter here is the number of characters that I want to return. So I'm just going to type in 100 as well here, close my write function, and see what happens. So now what's happening is it's only returning the right portion and the first 100 characters from the right. So it's returning Rogerstonville Shiredom plus whatever number of spaces before that. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to use our trim function to trim off all of the leading spaces in this string. So I'll hit trim. I want to trim this value off. And then I'm just going to close my trim. And voila. Let's pull this down and see what happens. Bingo. So now we've created kind of behind the scenes these long text strings that we can manipulate and use that trim function to clean it all up without anybody knowing. So it looks great. It works for a variety of different names and patterns, and even those that have missing data. All right, that gets us through the tutorial today. I hope you learned something and had fun. See you next time.